that it has been indeed reignited with the release of all migration data to June 2024. They have received mixed reactions from both ends of the political spectrum and the community, an indication that a balanced and nuanced discussion is needed on this significant issue. So we dive into some of the main points and analysis collected from a segment on GB News located below.
Now let's get cracking, because the long-awaited figures on legal and illegal migration to the year to June 2024 were released this morning, with the number of work visas issued falling by 11% to still an incredibly high 286,000, although this figure is still over double 2019 levels. And meanwhile, the number of detected arrivals by illegal immigrants fell by 26% to over 38,000, with over 81% of those arriving via small boats. Now, this all comes as reports suggest that the government is planning also to relax freedom of movement rules with the European Union to allow more young Europeans under the age of 30 to come and live and work in the UK, with a reciprocal agreement for young Brits to have easier access to the European Union. Now, to me, that sounds like the opposite of Brexit. Let's cross over to Clacton on Sea now and speak with GB News reporter Ray.
After a GB News reporter introduces the latest migration numbers, the segment begins. That pushed down legal work visas, which are at 286,000, still a significant number, but an 11% decline. This is still more than double that observed in 2019, though both these levels suggest a marked change to the shape of UK workforces over recent years. During this time, detections of illegal immigrant arrivals have fallen by 26%, over a meager 38,000 individuals, and an unprecedented amount coming across in small boats at almost 4 out of 5, 81%. This is a mixed picture, where the meager decrease in unauthorized entries is contrasted with how crazy big this challenge remains for local and federal officials. In another of the stories, there are further reports which claim that government intends to relax EU freedom of movement laws. The reporter notes emerging rumors in this direction. Amongst other things, this would be intended to allow young Brits into the EU and Europeans in return the option of living here for short-term stays. Many have met this suggestion with skepticism, and it has even been branded as antithetical to the ethos of Brexit. Now, to me, that sounds like the opposite of Brexit. GB News reporter. I think some people in UK are not feeling satisfied with what has been happening recently.
Good afternoon, Martin. I'm here with the leader of Reform UK and Clacton MP Nigel Farage. He's here at the Clacton Air Show. Nigel, events like this give you the opportunity to speak to the local people. What are they saying to you about these immigration figures?
Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK and MP for Clacton, shares his perspectives from the Clacton Air Show, providing a grassroots view of public sentiment.
Well, I mean, they're just negligible declines from all-time record numbers. I think one of the biggest things is house building. Everywhere you go within this constituency, there's 50 new houses here, 100 new houses there. We're told from the Labour government those targets from central government will double. So the impact on an area like this of just the new houses, with, by the way, no more GP surgeries, no new roads, is really, really big. So people are unhappy, and they feel that in the Brexit referendum and in voting for Boris, they voted for all of this to be put under control, and they've frankly been ignored. And that's why they voted for me here. That's why they voted for Reform.
One
of the grievances Farage dwells on is inescapable. It's that when too many people come to your country, you have to keep building more houses. He notes that this lack of an equal level of investment in services which people actually need, GPs and road infrastructure, for example, adds to community dissatisfaction. Wherever you go around this area, there's 50 new houses here, 100 there, but no more GP surgeries, nothing by way of additional roads. It's really, really big, Nigel Farage. He said voters felt betrayed by leaders who promised when campaigning for Brexit that immigration could be controlled again, and then saw local services are still heavily stretched as a result. This truly made me surprised about his attitudes.
At lunch was saying he met a bloke the other day in Ipswich, just up the road, 22-year army veteran living rough on the streets. And he said, well, how can it be that a bloke like that, that's got a few mental issues, PTSD issues, is on the street, and somebody crosses the channel and gets put in a 4-star hotel? It's the sense of unfairness. It's a sense of injustice, and it burns very, very strong. And if Yvette Cooper and Sir Keir Starmer think they can brush this issue under the carpet, they're wrong.
Then the discussion moves on to the cost, and it is indicated running illegal immigration runs into billions of pounds a year. Mr. Farage tells of a moving encounter that demonstrates the social iniquities. A 22-year army veteran was sleeping rough, while asylum seekers were put up in 4-star hotels. Meanwhile, the feeling of unfairness and justice is burning very strong, he said. Nigel Farage. This story highlights a broader sentiment in the public that funds might be better off spent on helping vulnerable citizens, vets, homeless people, etc.
I mean, the point about health and social care, health is we've capped the number of people going to medical schools. Aren't training enough doctors, so we rely on imported doctors. What kind of madness is that? And the same for nursing. We've made nursing an unfashionable profession. We've not encouraged people. We've made them go to university to get degrees before becoming nurses. God knows why. And so we take nurses from Africa and places where they're probably needed even more. So no, I think what these figures tell you through all the different sectors, whether it's skills with engineering, whether it's medical profession or care, is we need to be training our own people to do these jobs. And I say that with 9.4 million people of working age in Britain simply not working.
Addressing 26% decrease of health and social care work visas, a really impressive number, Farage calls UK dependence on foreign-trained professionals a national humiliation, informed by failing domestic training programs. He calls for education and training closer to home in order to fill these crucial jobs, lessening dependence on foreign workers. The UK needs to train its own workforce for such jobs. Where 9.4 million of working age in the UK are currently just not working. Nigel Farage.
It all before. Priti Patel said all the same things. If you employ illegal migrant workers, we'll fine you. You may go to prison. Massive penalties for smugglers. Life imprisonment. None of it. And you can put 1,000 new enforcement officers in place. But if the European Court of Human Rights stops you deporting people, what difference does it make? Are very clear that a country is not a country without controlling its borders, and you'll never do that with that activist foreign court in Strasbourg, which, remember, stopped that plane taking off to Rwanda back in 2022. We are clear that is the first step.
The measures announced are the creation of a 100-strong national crime agency team to target organized criminals making money from illegal immigration, penalties for employers, which in extreme cases can lead bosses being jailed if they know staff is working illegally, and £1 fund for local communities hit by large-scale influxes. But Farage doubts that the promise will become reality, saying similar promises have not had much effect, in part because of legal and bureaucratic problems, such as those caused by rulings from the European Court of Human Rights. He should doubt, though. You may have 1,000 new enforcement officers in place, but the European Court of Human Rights prevents you deporting people. Who cares? Nigel Farage.
Some of our young people will go to live and work in Europe, but many, many more from Europe will come and live and work and settle full-time here. And many of them may be lovely people, but our population explosion is the biggest social problem we face in Britain. Whether it's housing here in Clacton, whether it's access to GPs or dentists here or anywhere else, a 10 million increase in the population since Blair came to power has devalued the quality of life of everybody. It can't go on.
But Farage is less keen on the prospect of Labour easing restrictions to allow more people greater freedom of movement, warning that would only make worse problems created by population expansion. He stresses that rising traffic gridlock made cramped by continual population growth and placed new demands on public agency services. Our population explosion is the biggest social problem we face in Britain. It can't go on. Nigel Farage.
So what we saw in the figures this morning was the productivity of the Home Office civil servants literally collapsing in the year up to the general election, just not processing cases. Therefore, as Martin rightly says, the waiting list gets longer, but Labour will wave a magic wand, Martin. They'll solve all of it. They'll let
The discussion reveals a staggering tripling of granted asylum cases within a year, reaching a 40-year high. Farage predicts that under Labour, this issue may worsen, suggesting that their approach might involve permitting more individuals to stay without addressing underlying systemic inefficiencies. Wow, maybe his predictions are gonna true in some ways. Labour will wave a magic wand. They'll solve all of it. They'll let everybody stay. Nigel Farage.
I think that's a really, really good question. Over the election campaign, it seemed a little bit as though Keir Starmer would rather talk about anything apart from immigration. On illegal migration, obviously he's put an end to the Rwanda scheme, which, let's just remember, was not up and running by the time Rishi Sunak left office, came into all sorts of difficulties between when Boris Johnson first started talking about it in June 2022 and when the election was called in June 2024. There had been no migrants actually sent to Rwanda. That said, there was, in the minds of ministers and in the minds of quite a lot of officials too, there was a route to that Rwanda plan working, and Keir Starmer has thrown it out. There are those who are saying, did he throw out the baby with the bathwater? Because it doesn't really seem as though he has an alternative plan for illegal migration, particularly apart from increasing the number of caseworkers in the Home Office, which might well be necessary. When we look at these statistics today, it does seem as though the asylum system essentially ground to a halt in the year before the election. On legal migration, I mean, the numbers are down, and yes, you can say that they are still double the numbers in 2019. It isn't an all-out victory by any means, but James cleverly is making the point that those numbers have decreased by about 26% on, it must be said, record highs last year. But that is because of changes that the Conservatives brought in, and those changes were not allowing care workers and students to bring in their dependents when they come here. What is Labour going to do about that policy? By the sounds of it, they're going to try and keep it in place. But is Labour committed enough to getting our own sort of homegrown workers in the NHS and care sector? Because if this policy is going to work, we will need to replace those people who were coming over here, because that drop is very, very significant on work and social care visas. We will have to replace them with Brits.
Now, Olivia, I'd like to ask you about the idea that's been touted now, I think, 3 or 4 times in recent weeks, and that is the return of freedom of movement in the European Union. Now, I know that you speak to Labour ministers and they will vehemently deny that this is going to happen. In which case, Olivia, why does the idea keep getting floated out there? Are we being nudged? Are we being fluffed up for this to be feathered in a backdoor betrayal of Brexit?
No, I think that's a really good question. I mean, you could say no smoke without fire. The Labour ministers I've spoken to have said that they are not planning to introduce a freedom of movement deal. But the idea does keep coming up. And we know that Keir Starmer does want to reset Britain's relationship with the EU. What he wants is a veterinary deal so that food coming over from the UK to the EU and vice versa isn't subject to so many checks. And he wants some sort of science and research agreement with the EU. Now, in exchange, the EU have said that they would like to see some sort of freedom of movement. And one option that seems to be on the table is a deal whereby Brits between the ages of 18 and 30 could go to an EU country for up to 4 years to work, volunteer, study, etc. And in exchange, EU citizens between 18 and 30 could come over here. Now, obviously, that would be very, very controversial among Brexiteers, because one of the key reasons for Brexit was to stop that freedom of movement. And this would essentially sort of bring it in again by the back door. Does Keir Starmer, I mean, I reckon that instinctively he would quite like to go for this proposal if it would get him what he wants with the EU.
Totally.
But would he be willing to push ahead with it when obviously it would be seen as very controversial and would give a lot of fuel to the Conservatives' fire?
OK, Olivia Utley, thank you. Excellent stuff. Now,
GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley provides additional context, noting Labour's reluctance to prioritise immigration in their agenda. She questions whether Labour has viable solutions, especially after dismissing the controversial Rwanda plan for processing asylum seekers. Utley also discusses the trade-offs involved in any potential reintroduction of freedom of movement, emphasizing the political and social ramifications such a move would entail. The recent migration numbers and the lessons from this debate encapsulate so much of what is truly complex about immigration policy in Britain. The task of reconciling economic imperatives with social obligations, legal frameworks, and public sentiment remains Herculean for any government. These conversations highlight the need for holistic, practical solutions that tackle both urgent problems as well as future repercussions to deliver sustainable and equitable outcomes to all stakeholders. As the UK embarks on life after Brexit in earnest, it has a limited window over the coming months and years to develop policies that are coherent with its national self-identity while also managing realistically complex migratory geographies.